Hello, everyone. Welcome. Come on in into our virtual theater here. Thank you for coming to the Masters of Game Design speaker series. This is a regular speaker series we have here. It is sponsored by the New York Film Academy. We are located worldwide. We have locations in, here's just a few, New York for one, Los Angeles, which is where I am based out of. But we also have locations in Australia. I believe we have some in France or Italy. Gosh, we are, it's not just New York, it's all over the world. But we are a school that caters primarily in film, all aspects, directing and acting and screenwriting, if you're into those things. But we also have a wonderful game design program. And this is the program that brings you this series. My name is Scott Rogers. I am your host of the Masters of Game Design program. And we have a fantastic guest for you guys today. We're so glad to have you here. So thank you very much for coming. We'll get started in a minute or two. But in the meantime, I'd like to tell you about some upcoming events. And a little bit about what we do here at the New York Film Academy with game design. The school itself, so don't be fooled by the title, even though it does say Film Academy. We are a fully functioning game design school. You will, if you come to the New York Film Academy, and we are up and running, and we are doing everything virtually. All of our classes are taught virtually right now in this time of unusualness. But we want everybody to be safe and we want everyone to be healthy. And so right now, everybody is taking their classes virtually. We have a fantastic department. It is run by some of the best educators in the country. We have just recently shown up on a top 10 list as one of the top 10 game design school programs in the US. And we have all types of game creators that have worked on everything from Pokemon Go and League of Legends and God of War and, oh my gosh, the credits go on and on and on. We have a very impressive faculty that is here to teach students, and hopefully some of you are potential students, or maybe some of you are our current students attending. It is a fantastic program, and it also, we do these extracurricular events such as the Masters of Game Design program, which is what you're here to see. So I will stop talking about that and just remind you real quickly that if you want to see past Masters of Game Design speaker series, we have them on YouTube. If you go onto New York Film Academy and YouTube, and I'm going to put a link here in the chat. There's a playlist of all types of people. You're going to have to dig a little bit, but our guests include people like, Ted Price, who is the head of Insomniac Games, or Elon Lee, the designer of Exploding Kittens, or Jonathan Ackley, who is a Disney Imagineer who makes games for the parks. And there are a whole bunch of these, so just go ahead and search through, or if you're curious about past events, we have a list of them on our Meetup website, which I'm sure several of you found us through. So thank you very much for joining our Meetup group and finding us, and we're thrilled to have you here. I want to also let you know about some upcoming events so you can plan accordingly. Later this month, just keep your eye out on Meetup for the announcement. We are doing a level design workshop. And this is a workshop that I am going to be leading. I am a game designer who has worked for over 25 years in the video game and other gaming industries. And you'll be learning from me the basics of game design, of level design. So if you're interested in level design, we would love to have you join us. It's a hands-on workshop. We'll be doing kind of working on a program, probably either Unity or Construct, still working out the technical details, but that way you can follow along with us online. And then another event we're also doing in September is an advanced computer animation program taught by Craig Caton-Largent. He is one of our, not only an instructor, but he's the chair of our animation department. We have an animation department here as well at the New York Film Academy. He is a legend in his industry. He has done animation for Jurassic Park and Ghostbusters and Predator, and his resume puts anybody's to shame. It's amazing, but he's a great guy, a fantastic teacher. So these are two events that you want to keep your eyes open for in the near future. But you're not here for that right now. You are here for our guest. So let me introduce her to you. Our guest has been working in the entertainment industry for over 25 years as an artist, director, and creator of video games, visual effects, augmented reality, and virtual reality experiences. She has worked with Disney, Marvel, Nickelodeon, Lightstorm Entertainment, THQ, and many, many more. Please welcome a master of game design and of art, Candice Colbert. Yay, this is where everybody will be clapping for you, Candace. So welcome, Candace. It's so nice to have you here. How is your pandemic so far?
It's been very exciting. I've been working from home the whole
nice.
time.
Excellent.
So I'm blessed to be working is all I have to say.
Yes. As somebody who is also working, I am very appreciative that I am still working. All right. So every Masters of Game Design, I start with a very hard question, and that is, Candice Colbert, what is your favorite game?
Ooh, that's a really great question, actually. Are we talking all time or just what I'm playing currently?
All time, and it doesn't matter. It can be any type of game. It could be a video game, a board game, virtual reality, whatever.
Okay, there's so many. Actually, I'll go to virtual reality because I have to say my favorite experiences are entirely immersive. That's the space that I've been working in recently. Yeah. I'd have to say our game is up there.
Now, wait, when you say our game, what is that? What are you referring to?
So Scott and I worked on a game called Terminator Salvation. Fight for LA.
Fight for the future, I think is what they ended up with.
And I really, truly loved that experience.
What do you love about playing it?
It's funny. It's just because I guess I just got to say, when you make a game, you have to test it all the time, right? And that was one of the few experiences I actually never really got tired of testing. So that's a good sign. It's just the magic of interactivity, I think, honestly, the immersive interactivity.
I think it didn't hurt that we got to lug around big virtual rifles and got to ride on a virtual motion platform, kind of like a theme park ride.
Yeah.
So there were a lot. For me, it never got old to ride that motion platform. That was one of the best things.
I think that's true. And I've done lots of other immersive things, and I'll give the props to, the Void and some of the other who are doing similar things. They're doing amazing things, but just for some reason, I think maybe because we were always playing with friends,
it would always be like, who wants to play test? And we never had a lack of play testers. That was a good sign that we had made something that people like playing.
Right.
Yeah. So, that's great.
Yeah. So, okay.
Well, I'm a little flattered to have been involved in your favorite game.
Yes.
So that's awesome. All right. So when did you start playing games? Like, how old were you when you remember first playing games?
Okay. So since you already sort of dated me with been working for over 25 years.
Well, you could have started working when you were 5 or something.
I was very young. So when I was really young, that was the era of arcades, right? My childhood tracks very well with Stranger Things.
Yeah, nice.
So I was always at the arcade. My 10th birthday was a Pac-Man party.
Nice.
We all got together at the local ice cream shop. Is where it was, where we had the Pac-Man machine and everybody was playing Pac-Man. Actually, Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man are still actually favorites of mine, and Galaga too, for some reason.
All those early Namco games are great.
I love them. So, that's when I started playing games.
Right.
I went to school for animation, and it was very early in the computer animation world. I was actually one of the first people at my college to do a 3D animation piece for my senior project. So it was pretty fresh. And when I came out into the industry, I actually went first into animation and worked on shows. Mostly the first one I worked on was called the Maxx.
Right. So wait a second. You're jumping ahead a little bit.
Sorry.
That's fine. No, it's good. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about your collegiate experience, because having this emerging technology come in as you're studying, was that something that you were? Did you feel like school well prepared you for this, or like what was your first encounter with this, and did you kind of go, this is awesome, or did you go, oh, this isn't what I want to do?
No. I knew it was what I wanted to do. I knew that's where things were going. But because it was such a young art form, there wasn't as much, actual teaching as there is probably now, as far as, I had to read a lot of manuals and,
What kind of hardware did you have access to back then? Do you
so
remember?
we were using Unix machines running Wavefront, not Alias Wavefront, Wavefront.
Right, the original Wavefront. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
And you were doing animation in Wavefront?
I was. And
oh, wow, that's great.
It was very slow. It was, it would take a half an hour to render something that you could render like that today.
Right.
And it's really funny because it was very experimental. I was doing computer animation for my senior project. I mixed it with paint on glass and actually human sort of puppetry, is human animation.
Right.
And what I do in VR these days is so related to that. It's really weird.
Yeah, it's all this stuff kind of comes back around, right?
It does.
I have a class here at NYFA where I teach the history of video games, and I often ask the students, I'm like, how old do you think virtual reality is? And they're like, I don't know, the 90s or something like that, or 2000. Like usually I'll get some number and I'll say, well, actually it started in the 60s and it really became commercial in like the late 80s. And they're like, wait, what? And then I would show them all the things that people were doing back then. And I'm like, other than the fact that there's less wires hanging off of you, it's not that different than what we're doing today.
We're getting better frame rates.
Well, we are getting better frame rates, and we are the render time is a lot less, like you said. So that's good.
Sure.
Well, that's awesome though that you got that experience in college. Not very many people would have had access to that. Like when I was in school, I remember finding out about computer animation. I would go to a few lecture. I've been to some lectures with John Lasseter and a few other computer animators. And so I'm like, oh, this looks kind of cool. Let me find out more about this. And when I went to a state school in California, and I would ask, hey, where can I find a computer that I can maybe do some animation with? And they said, well, talk to the industrial design students and the computer aided design, like CAD, the architecture students. And I would go to them and say, hey, can you show me how to use this? And they're like, no, only special people get to use this. And it was very gate kept at the time. Like I remember getting very angry and going, well, the heck with you guys. If you're not going to let me learn how to use this, then I'll do something else. So good for you being able to have access to something back when you were in school.
I was very lucky.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So like you said, the things that you learned, you're finding are coming back to help you. I mean, almost said haunt, but to help you as you do VR today. Like what is an example of something you've done recently that? So
an example is not so much the technology that I'm finding is the same, but maybe more what kind of art I'm making with it. So the projects I've been working on in the past year or two for a company called Map Design Lab have been very they've been very body centric, often very colorful, nature related, movement related projects. And like I said, my very first film had a character, an avatar that was this very plain, it was like, imagine like a completely white model, or gray kind of model, very plain, with nothing going on, looks very computery. And in my little short film, he has this like little red ball and he throws it out the window and breaks the window, and it comes back in through the window as this like paint creature that inhabits him. And at the end, he becomes actually human with paint all around him, right?
Right.
And I actually was working on a project last summer, I think it was, and I was creating an avatar, and I was creating a paint skin for the avatar. And I was like, wait a minute, this is exactly, the thing I was doing in my senior film 25 years ago, and so what I find about the technology is that it's really just informing the art, right? Mm-hmm. And the same is true with design, right? You might design something on paper, right? I know you do a lot of game board designs, right?
Yep.
Paper games, as they're called, or board games. And you're maybe thinking of some of the same game mechanics that you might build into a game, into a 3D game. And so a lot of what it has to do with is not always how, the tools you use to get there, but it's the art that you're making with those tools.
Right. I mean, it's just another set of tools. It doesn't matter if it is a oil painting or animated film or a computer rendered character or a statue, right? It's that creativity. And then what is the best tool for that expression, I guess, right?
Exactly.
So one of our guests, first of all, thank you for asking questions. Please go ahead and use the Q&A button to ask questions, and then we'll do our best to answer them as we go. One of our guests, Andrew, asks that first of all, he says that your paint skin animation idea sounds really cool. He wants to know, is your student film online anywhere?
Oh gosh, I don't think it is, because it was filmed in 16 millimeter.
Uh-huh.
And I don't think I've ever digitized it, but
you need to transfer it over, right?
Yeah, I think I have it on VHS somewhere.
Right.
But yeah. I think that's a good idea. Maybe I should.
Awesome.
I don't know if anybody needs to see it, really.
Well, but I mean, sometimes it's cool to see those old artifacts, right? It's I don't know. I have a friend who he's an animator, and he's done like stop motion animation, and he put up things that he worked on in like he's pretty old. He put up stuff from the 70s, and it was great to see him because they were so raw and compared to like the stuff he's doing nowadays. And so I don't know, for myself, maybe because I'm interested in the history of where things come from, but I always like to see those early works. So you might want to consider putting those things up.
I think that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you, Andrew. Another question is, so you went to, according to my research, you went to RISD, which is the Rhode Island School of Design. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So what, did you go explicitly to study animation?
Actually, when I first applied to art school, I wanted to be a painter. Okay. I like to paint portraits. I had been working at an amusement park. We've talked about this. I had worked at an amusement park for several summers, drawing portraits, cutting silhouettes. And I thought, well, I want to be a painter. And then I got to RISD, which at the time cost like $35,000 a year, which doesn't sound like a lot to college students now, maybe.
Right, but it was a lot back then.
It was like going to Yale or something. It was crazy amounts of money. And my roommate was a painter, and she got critiques and she got a space, and that was it. Like I felt like, oh my gosh, if I don't leave the school with some sort of practical you know, job possibility. You know, this is going to be a disaster. So,
Yeah.
so I said, what could I do where I could paint and still learn a skill? And so that's when luckily at RISD, they have a foundation year. So you don't have to decide the first year.
Right.
So during my foundation year, I looked around and I saw that people were painting animation. I had seen some beautiful painted animation where they were doing paint on glass animation and things like that. And even some, you know, the Spike and Mike festivals were really big back then. And I remember this one particular animation that really had an impact on me that was just a simple like ink drawing animation. And I thought, wow, okay, that could be where I apply my painting skills, my color work or whatever. And so I ended up in the film animation video department.
Right. Yeah. So you mentioned that you were a background painter on the Maxx TV show.
I was.
Right? So this is the based on the comic book, right? The indie comic book
By Sam Keith.
Yeah, Sam Keith. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what was it like to work on an animated show back then?
It was actually really great. I had gotten hired basically out of college on the recommendation of a visiting guest, right? Like I'm sort of visiting you guys today. So this guest, you know, she was at MTV, and I said, you know, I'm going out to California. Do you know of anything I could apply to? And she suggested that I apply to a company called Rough Draft, which was owned by Greg Banzo, still is, I believe. And he looked at my work and said, okay, well, we're not really doing 3D animation here, but I like your color work. I like your color. So why don't you become a background painter? He's like, you know, Photoshop, go for it, you know? And so, so I became a background painter and a color stylist.
And was this in the early days of digital background painting?
Very early, yes. Yeah. In fact, my next job, after I worked on the Maxx, I went to a company called Creative Capers, and I was there for about 6 years. And I worked with, my mentor was a guy named Ron Diaz, who was a Disney background painter.
Oh, yeah.
And he was a very traditional, you know, painter.
Right.
And so I tried to learn as much as I could from him and apply it to the digital world when I was painting backgrounds.
And how much of that transferred over?
I hope a fair amount. You know, I mean, he definitely influenced how I see colors and how I can use colors. I also, you know, it's funny. I worked with a guy named Walt Dorn, who is the director of all the Trolls movies, and he directed, I think, like the last couple of Shreks, or at least was like a head story guy or something. Anyway, I remember working on a project with Walt, and he had an interesting way of looking at color that actually helped me limit my palette sometimes, which was good. It was actually a really good way to think about color. Whereas Ron was always using every single crazy color.
He's like, you've got the whole rainbow, use it.
Yeah. And I both of those strategies actually have served me really well over the years.
I've heard the color limiting concept before. What would you say is the if you're going to go that way? What's the optimal number of colors?
I don't know. Walt used to say, like, oh, this is the colors I have in my markers.
So if his markers have run out, that's the ones he uses. Okay.
Yeah, right, but I like to have, here's a tip actually from Ron.
Okay.
Which is to combine your primaries with a tertiary color. So you're not always going like, you know, red, blue, yellow. Maybe you'll do like a I don't know, a blue and then like a taupey color or something like that, like a different, you know.
Right, to kind of mix the cool and the warms and well, everybody loves that blue-orange combination, right? That's
Yeah,
the,
I
that's
had a
the
job
magic.
once where that's the only thing I was allowed to do. It was horrible. I
Was
try to
all
break
blue
it.
and orange.
Yeah.
So from doing the background painting at Rough Draft, what skills transferred over from working in animation to when you eventually started working in gaming?
Okay, so I had sort of this gradual uh, road back into 3D animation from 2D.
Yeah, I
So
know. We'll talk about a whole bunch of them more, but I was just curious that, like, was there anything from that job in particular that, like, you thought
sure.
back and went, well, you know, that this is just like what I used to do at Rough Draft.
I would say some of the color stuff, maybe, and just some of the procedures. To be honest with you, when I look back at that stuff, I mean, I was such a young painter. You know, I feel like it's really rough. You know, I feel like it could be.
Well, no artist likes their own work, Candace.
Yeah, well, um, but you know, I mean, I think part of it, you know, I was really blessed to have a day or two where I actually got to work with Sam Keith, and that was very I don't know, strong as far as just seeing how an artist works and puts his ideas down on the page. So that definitely stuck with me.
Right.
And I would say also always back up your work. we had this one situation where a server went down, and I was like so grateful I had backed up my backgrounds, and
Yeah.
you know,
Save often and always is the
exactly.
motto, right? Well, good. Well, I'm glad that that's a lesson that you came away with. So I don't know if this is correct in your chronology. You worked for ILM as a CG artist for a little while?
No, I didn't work directly for ILM, actually. I'm not sure what part.
I have 101 Dalmatians was with ILM.
I worked on that at Capers, actually.
Oh, okay. All right. So that was you guys were being outsourced by ILM to work on stuff, or
I think we were hired by Disney. We did a lot of work for
okay.
Disney back in
right.
those days. And our part of that movie was actually to create, there's this video game in the movie. If you recall, the live action 100 Dalmatians has the main guy as a game designer. And right. And so it was our job to create the game right. that was in the movie. And so
was it playable or just the visuals?
It was mostly just the visuals. We actually at the time were making a lot of games for Disney, right. and these were the old 2D, you know, animated storybooks and the old activity centers and things like that for Disney. Right. So things like, you know, Hercules and Mulan and, you know, Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, all those kind of 2D kind of games back then.
Right. Trying to match the art style of the animators.
Yeah, and I mean, in some cases, our animators were those animators. I mean, we had people who worked at Capers who were Disney artists. I mean, like I said, Ron had painted for Disney for many, many years, and he was who my mentor was. So, yeah, we were working with people. A lot of people at Capers actually came out of Bluth.
Oh yeah, sure.
They were the Bluth crew.
Right. Yeah. Don Bluth, a famous ex-Disney animator who maybe most, well, I was going to say, what's he most famous for? Is it Secret of Nim or Dragon's Lair? Which one is he more famous for?
It's I'm not sure. They're both very big, but the principals at Capers were actually like super important on those movies. So
right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Sue produced some of them. And anyway,
cool.
You can look it up. I don't want to misquote anything.
That's okay.
Yeah, but we'll
put it in the notes.
Yeah, Creative Capers was, I mean, still is in the animation industry, but it was quite the behind the scenes force for a lot was Disney games.
Yeah, it sounded like a big support system for a lot of those projects.
Yeah.
So was it the majority of the work you were doing at Creative Capers, was it 2-dimensional or 3D or?
When I started, it was more 2D. And then that's what I was saying. It became a gradual road back into 3D because I was still very interested in 3D. So, you know, because I could paint, I, you know, said, hey, can I paint some textures? And then, of course, once you're painting textures, you need to know how to model so that you can apply your textures. And then, you know, then I would say, well, you know, I know all this stuff about lighting that I've learned from Ron, you know, and maybe I could apply some lighting to these scenes. And so I became a lighter, and then it just sort of grew from there.
Right.
And so by the time I was done at Capers, I was a 3D artist.
Right. Excellent. You have
Yeah.
leveled up.
Yeah, exactly.
So something else that you have leveled up on, and this is actually the first day I met you, this is one of the things I remember, was that you teach Photoshop professionally.
Yeah, I
from
did.
time to time.
Yeah.
And so, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, just I had taught it at a couple of industry schools, and kind of like you teach game design.
Yeah. So what is the we have a lot of our students and aspiring game creators that often will need to encounter Photoshop if they can find a way to afford it. I know that it can be kind of pricey, but what's your top tip for maybe a new Photoshop user, somebody that is still maybe learning how to use it and hasn't mastered all the pro tips for Photoshop yet?
Right. I would say the thing I used to tell my class is read the manual. You know, but
that doesn't exist anymore. Well,
yeah,
it does, but
you don't get the manual. So YouTube is a fantastic wealth of information. If you ever want to find some way to do something, I would say do not neglect your masks and paths. I would say masks and paths, learning how the channels mix together, those and using your layers properly. Those tools are still just tried and true for me. And I still use Photoshop all the time, even when I'm doing VR. It's a really important.
Yeah, I'd say that nowadays it is one of the top 3 tools that any artist, doesn't matter what I was just using Photoshop today to do board game stuff. So, you know, I use it all the time. Although I admit I don't use my masks and paths. So maybe afterwards I can ask you for some advice.
I'm telling you, your world will grow.
I was going to say, for somebody that's been using Photoshop for as long as I have, I'm probably still using it at a beginner level, but whatever. That is all right. So we have a question here from. I'm sorry, I'm going to murder your name here. Is it Verliana? Verliana asks, is there any 3D software that you would recommend?
Sure, I use Maya for building things. I also use Maxx, but I've become more of a Maya girl over the years.
Is Maxx still as prevalent in the industry as it used to be?
It's not, I would say, which is one of the reasons I don't use it as much. But in games, it certainly is still used. You know, they've become so similar in a lot of ways. It's more about the vocabulary when you're using them. Right. And I know a lot of people use Blender at this point, you know, things that are, you know, free.
Exactly. That always helps.
And I would say for game engine, I use Unity. I love Unity. I also have used Unreal, but not in a long time. And I'm more than happy. Their engine is just phenomenal. I just drool every time I see their you know, big reels. Their sizzle.
Yeah. Their latest demo was like, don't worry about polygons.
Oh my God.
You don't have to think about them anymore. And I'm just like, that's just more work.
Yeah. But I was just like, oh my Lord, as an artist, it's just beautiful.
Right. Yeah. You can make anything possible.
Yeah. So, I mean, but Unity's great for making gameplay and making things happen. You know, I like not only the art side, I like the design side. I like the
the making side.
Yeah, I do.
Nice. So Maya for 3D and Unity for everything else.
Yeah, or Unreal. I mean,
Unreal.
don't
yeah.
shy away from Unreal if you have it, you know.
Right. Well, it is free, so at least unless you want to, unless you start, what is it? If you make $100,000 on your project, then they start charging you.
Right.
So,
right.
well, thanks for the question, Verliana. That's a great question. All right, so let's move forward a little bit more. You're saying that, you know, at this point you're doing a lot of lighting for 3D.
Mm-hmm.
I have this 3D Bob is a company I have here that you worked with, where
Yeah.
you were lighting. How is lighting a computer environment different than lighting a real world environment?
Well, that's actually a really interesting question, because I worked very closely on that project with a real world lighter who is now a DP in the industry. Cool. Yeah.
Can you mention who that is? Or?
Yeah, Peyton Skelton. And okay. He's got an amazing eye, amazing cinematography, amazing lighting. He was on Grays for many years. And anyway, so he and I worked together, and he had never worked digitally before that project. And I had, other than film school, really, and doing photography, I hadn't really worked practically, not in the way that he has. You know, it's very different to work in television or film, you know, Hollywood sure. style, than it is even to work at a very good film school, you know. And so sometimes we would work together to try to find what is the digital solution for that real world thing, or vice versa. You know, I would say, oh, well, you know, we can just, you know, change the way the shadows are. And he's like, you mean like a cookie? And I'm like, yeah. You know, like, and we would sometimes, you know, kind of go back and forth with like the practical way of doing something versus the digital way of doing something. And the nice thing about that project, it was the very first project I worked on that was starting to use global illumination. And so we were starting to get that real world lighting a little bit more on that project than I had been able to on previous projects. And right. Yeah, that was an interesting little gig there.
Nice. Why do you think, as a person who is interested in lighting and has done a lot of it, why is lighting so important to environmental design for both movies and games?
Oh, this is a big one.
I knew it was a big one.
Yeah, and this is something actually that I learned painting those backgrounds. This is something I learned back in the Maxx days and Capers days. Lighting can tell a story of its own. You know, you can have a whole set and have no animation, but if it's lit in an interesting way, you can pull focus onto a character or a prop or a section of the scene that means something in the story. And so when you're lighting, you want to be thinking not just of, you know, okay, can I see things? You know, sometimes you don't want to see things. Sometimes you just want the edge of something. Sometimes you want, you know, a really bright area of the screen and a really dark, big field, because you want to lead your eyes. So I would say lighting is extremely important. There's almost, I want to say it's almost no easier way to get drama in your shot. You know, I would say composition and like where the camera is, and this applies to games too. You have a camera in a game, and you have lights in a game, and you know, I've always thought of it as you've got to light your environment, but then you have to light your characters. So in the old days, you would have a character rig that would follow the character around, this lighting setup that would follow the character around. It's not needed quite in the same way anymore with all the HDRI lighting and all the global illumination that you have going on and the Pbr materials and things.
So it's become closer to just creating a real world environment, really.
It depends. You know, that's the thing. You have to kind of make a decision. Am I making reality, which I find often looks cool, but doesn't always hit the mark. That's where you can get into uncanny valley kind of area.
Right.
Or you can use real world lighting to inform something that's stylized, which actually I find has, in some ways, even more heightened effect.
Right. Well, because we associate lighting so much with emotion, right? With, all red light is going to be anger or passion, or a very bright light is maybe holy or mystical or something, or a blue light is going to feel mysterious or cold or, whatever. Right. So yeah, I can definitely see how would it be fair to say that you always want to start with reality and then go from there? Or is it better to go from the intentionality of what you want out of the lighting situation and then maybe adjust accordingly?
I'm not sure. I think it's sort of has to do with your where you're starting with from a concept art perspective. The best projects, I feel, always have a concepting phase to them, where you either have concept artists or people who are creating maybe a level sort of in pre-production, where you're trying to see what the look is, what the feel is, before you even get to maybe what you're designing.
Right.
I think it's really important to think about those things. I've definitely been on projects where we skip that step and you feel it. Like you feel, I mean, that
suffers for.
Yeah. And so I think having that sort of experimentation time, that the concepting time, the visual development time is very important to any project. And yes, I use PBR materials a lot in my work, but not always. Sometimes I know what I want is going to be gotten through a different type of material. And I actually, one of the areas that I've been really interested in the past year or so, couple years, is creating shaders and creating materials that serve the scene. And the other important aspect to lighting is the materials. If you light something and the materials don't accept that light or bounce that light back in the right way, it's not going to look great. So, so these are things to consider, and these are things to think about when designing.
Where do you get that knowledge? Because that seems to be, I mean, other than observing things in the real world, I mean, that always, I think, is a good place to start. But what if, young students of the art sometimes can be a little impatient, and they're like, I want to learn this stuff now. Where would you recommend they go to maybe ingest this information a little faster?
Sure. Well, probably the New York Film Academy, I'm sure.
Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't want to turn this into a whole big plug, but yes, we have a wonderful animation department. You should come and take classes. But let's say they haven't enrolled yet, and
they want additional.
Or they want additional information. Yeah. Like where did you find this stuff out as an artist?
Sure. Well, to be honest with you, with the shader stuff, so some of it came from working with other artists, right? Just knowing what's out there, knowing that other artists are getting an effect can give you an idea. So one thing is to be consuming all of what's around you, and to be consuming things like demos on YouTube. When Unity comes out with a new engine, they'll have like a sizzle reel, and they had so when they announced shader graph and VFX graph, I saw those sizzle reels and I was like, wow, I got to learn more about this. And so I started going onto Twitter, trying to find people putting up samples. I started going onto YouTube, looking for tutorials. I started going to, resources online that you can find. I know in LA, if you were if you're a member of the library, the public library, you can take Lynda courses for free. So
oh, that's cool.
Yeah, actually that's one of the ways that I started to learn C#, which helps me in Unity.
Right.
And so I think, you know, looking at all of these sources online, you know, and just Googling stuff, you know, just typing into Google, like, well, how do I get a butterfly to fly in my scene, you know, or how do I get, you know, this water effect to work? Sometimes you'll get a page or a blog or a YouTube video that can really help you through, and you have to sort of go through a lot of these, you know,
Right.
but you can sort of really help yourself learn in this way.
So be willing to learn.
Yeah, don't be afraid. I think that's one of the biggest tips I have, I guess, for like young coders, young designers, people who are just starting out in a new part of the industry or something, is don't be afraid to learn. Don't let your ego get in the way of learning something new, because, you know, even if you don't know it perfectly, or you aren't as good as somebody else, it's going to inform something about what you do, and
Right.
you know, might give you a tool in your
you're only going to get better by learning. Nobody has ever learned more and gotten worse.
Right. And honestly, I work with a fair amount of people who are like, you know, like afraid to ask questions. They don't want to look dumb or
Right,
anything.
right, yeah.
And unfortunately, I don't have that problem. I will ask questions all the time, because you're not going to learn if you don't. You know,
Right.
if you just assume that you know everything, you aren't going to get better, and you're not going to progress. And I really think it's important to do that. And I think the other thing is don't be intimidated by all the people who do know all these things, because what I learned, the secret that I learned from some of the coders I've worked with, they all Google everything anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they don't know. Programmers don't know anything. They just
No,
all get everything from online.
no, they know stuff, but it's like a language, right? You may know the words and the syntax, but you know, when you start to read poetry, maybe you know how to put those words together a little bit better. I kind of liken it to that.
Learn some new tricks.
Yeah.
So in your career, we're kind of around the point where you were working in video games at Heavy Iron, which is where we first met. And first of all, I want to thank you for something that you taught me early on that I had no clue. You were working on, I believe it was the Incredibles game, The Rise of the Underminer, the first Incredibles #2. I don't know what that other movie thing was, but for me, it will always be the video game is the real sequel. And you showed me, I very distinctly remember you talking about the color charts that you had gotten from Pixar that you guys were using. You talked about this a little earlier, how you were like being guided by these lighting and color samples that Pixar had sent down. I mean, my question normally was going to be like, well, why are they so important? But you've already kind of described this, is that they help, they give you a roadmap for but can you give me a little more information about that what you learned from Pixar about that process?
Sure. So I'll talk a little bit about color styling for a sec. So when things were all 2D, you know, like way back in the day when people painted cells, you know, they had to have a way of creating the colors so that they would always be consistent. So they would, in those days, they would say, okay, we're using red number 4 plus, you know, a little bit of yellow number 18. And, you know, they would have some formula for it. And it would be somebody's job to call out what those colors were, and they would like literally have a cell with the character, maybe have a turnaround of the character, and you would have a line that went to a certain part of their body and said, okay, this color blue is you know, navy plus black. And then in the digital world, when that started happening, you would call out RGBs usually. Yeah. So it'd be, you know, okay, this is, I don't know, 203, 10, 14, or whatever it is. And that becomes your call out. And so anybody, anywhere in the world, like in Korea, where a lot of this stuff was painted, or China or India, wherever it was being painted, the colors would always be the same. And now often it's easier to use like a hexadecimal, you know, number, and that's the color, because a lot of things are on web. So so to bring that back around to 3D, so you when you have your characters being designed, you know, color is going into that design from the start, right? The concept artists are thinking about the colors when they're drawing the characters. And there has to be some time when somebody says, okay, this is the color. And that color may change depending on the lighting, right? Like a blue shirt in dark lighting is going to be literally a different RGB than a blue shirt in a bright light. Right. But that base color that it starts with is always the same. And the colors on the face and on the shirt and on the pants or whatever are going to be in the same proportion to each other. And so that's what the call outs are. And Pixar, their thing was with materials, their thing was like to create realistic looking materials, but not, it's hard to, it's like what the ideal version of that material is. Mm-hmm. So in The Incredibles, it was like, it wouldn't just be like pavement, like you might find in a video game with all kinds of cracks and, you know, divots and stuff like that. It would be like the idealized, realistic version of the pavement.
Right. Well, they would go even further, though. They would, the thing that I remember you showing me was that they would tell the story using, once they have the colors established, they would say, all right, this part is when, you know, Bob is fighting the Underminer for the first time, and so we want things to be oranges and reds, and then it would, the next scene would be, well, we can't have another scene that's red and orange and brown, so we have to have it be, you know, this is a scene about at night, and it's purple and yellows, and like I remember you showing me and saying, look, you can tell the whole story just through the color.
Yeah,
I always thought that was fascinating.
That's called the color script.
Oh, okay.
And that you can see these beautiful, this is probably something maybe that we looked at together, these beautiful like line paintings almost. Yeah, yeah. You can look at the whole movie just with lines of color. Right. And it really does inform it. You know, if you look at any of the Pixar films, you can look at them like that, and you could see, you know, in Nemo when things are blues and greens, and then they go to yellows, and oh, it's a dangerous scene, so now it's red, and you know, it's an important thing, and it's a really good idea to think about the progression through your story. Again, it's all to serve the art, right? It's all to serve the story.
Do you find that those kind of techniques are being more commonly used with other people other than Pixar and Disney, or did you find that to be exclusive to them?
No. I think that's actually common in the industry. It's common with animation artists, especially. I remember my first color script I think I ever saw was in college. No. There was a guy named Ted Mathot. I will never forget, because he was an amazing artist, and I believe he's some big mucky muck nowadays. But he had this beautiful color script for his senior film, and I just remember seeing it and thinking like, okay, this is good. This is something I want to think about when I'm making things, is what is the color script. And actually in one of my big projects at MAP, we did a project called Embody, and it was a VR experience that involved body movement like yoga or Aikido, and it was a 2-person experience, and each scene was trying to to evoke sort of a feeling out of you. Color was actually
I watched some clip of it. It was it won some awards at Sundance, right?
It did.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
But what I thought was very interesting was like using the VR to say, all right, we are going to try and capture the stillness of a tree. And so you would assume certain body positions. And then as you were successful at maintaining these positions, your tree would grow. And so you could actually see the results of your, it was interesting because it was like turning the idea of stillness into gameplay, which was like, all right, how still can you be? But yet you're still going to get feedback and results for being successful at that activity or non-activity. And so I was like, wow, that's really cool. That's a neat inversion of what we're so used to with VR and video games, where everything is very action oriented.
Yeah, I think you never got to play it, right?
No, unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to try it out yet. I don't have a VR rig at home, so
right.
It
was a 2-bit.
What's that?
It was a 2-bit for a while. So.
Oh, okay, all right, yeah.
Other place, but the thing about Embody was, you know, we had these moments of transition between the scenes, and color became a really important part of the transitions because the idea was it was supposed to be what it feels like when the sun hits your eye for a second. Like, that was the direction that I got on that from my director. And so color and how it bloomed and how it grew out and switched scenes while it was doing that was a really important way of changing the direction of where you were supposed to feel, or how you were supposed to feel, or where you were supposed to be. And at the very end, actually, there's this very interesting color transition in the background, and it happens kind of almost without you thinking about it. But when you went into the experience in the original form, the lighting in the room was the color that you saw when you first put the headset at. And when you left the experience, the color had changed to the last color that you saw in the headset. So the wraparound experience was important in that case, because it kept the feeling of that color in your mind, whether you realized it or not. Color is really important for stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so much. Once again, so much of our emotional language has been translated into the color palette, so we can use, at the very least, it's a good shorthand. One of the listeners, Sean, asks that they regularly use a color palette site like Color Hunt. I'm not familiar with this, but do you know Color Hunt?
I've used a different one, but yes.
Oh, okay. They say, what do you use for lighting reference? Is there a certain resource that you rely on?
Sure. So depending on the look that I'm trying to go for, or what I'm trying to get, I'll have reference material. It might be a beautiful mountain scene, or it might be a picture from a movie, or it might be a painting. And in those cases, I might use something like that. I think I use like Colorio or something, or Photoshop actually has some color picking things inside Photoshop. But you can get a palette from those images, or you can choose your own palette from those images. You know, you get like 7 colors, let's say, from those images, and then apply them to your scene and think about your scene using those colors. I think that's a great way actually to boil it down. And you know, those techniques are so easy now. You can get them on your phone.
I was going to say, what would we do without Google Images, right?
Right. Oh yeah, Google Images is. I actually was super annoyed when they changed their format of the way they list their images, because it's so handy. You know, you go and you say, okay, I want to see a picture of a duck, you know, and you look it up and there's like 8,000 ducks, and you can choose which duck you want as your reference, you know.
Just pick the duck. Don't pick the first one though. That's my advice.
I would
Never,
say another good resource for that actually is Flickr. A lot of people
yeah.
don't want you to download their things from Flickr, so don't do that. But a lot of people put their stuff with Creative Commons, and you can look at Flickr and you can get a lot of great reference from a lot of very good photographers, which is
Right.
helpful because Google's not always
Yeah.
good photography.
Yeah. They're not, a lot of the images in Google are not taken with an artistic eye. They are
Right.
just informational at best.
Right.
All right, so let's go back to THQ for a minute again. What did you find was the biggest difference between doing all this great animation and film and that kind of work with like console gaming, like very traditional, you know, because you worked on games like SpongeBob SquarePants and Ratatouille and Wall-E and so all these very like third-person character types of action games, you know, for the most part. Most of them were, right? Mini game and action games. What did you find, like what were some things that you had to learn? And then what did you find, like what were some big takeaways when you were, after making all those games?
Okay, so for console games, it's important to realize you can't hide too much. Or to hide things, you have to do it differently. In film and animation, all the time you cheat. You don't have to build the back of a building, you know, because you're never going to go over there, you know. Right. But in console games, generally you are, or you might spin the building and put, you know, 3 copies of it or something. So that was something I had to learn, was that I couldn't cheat quite as much. And then, you know, the other thing about games that's really important is that you are serving gameplay, and gameplay is as much of an art as as any other art. And and so, you know, just because you want to make a beautiful, you know, 300,000 polygon car and put it in the scene because it's pretty, it may make the game slog and make it unplayable. And so one of the things that I really learned when I was at THQ was how to make my assets as efficient as possible. And, you know, do not have wasted polygons, do not have wasted texture space. And that's still true with VR today, because VR is often running on headsets that don't have, you know, quite the heft of a, you know, PS4 or something, you know, necessarily. Right. Now, what if they're rendering it like 5 times, you know?
Sure. Right. But what if you're dealing with a game that the design or the visual style of it calls for very realistic, you know, environments or animation or things like that? Like, how do you deal with that? Like, there's a difference between having something stylized and then having something having to be very true to how it looks in the real world. What kind of tricks or things that you encountered that help you kind of deal with that?
So I would say definitely learning about Pbr rendering for your students is a really smart idea. Those kind of pipelines create really easy to light, realistically materials. And I think that's really important. It could also standardize your materials a bit, which is kind of important. If you look at metal, you want the metal to look like metal the whole time. You don't want it to suddenly look like plastic or something. Right. So it's definitely check out those pipelines. And I would say when you're modeling something, don't skimp on the edges. You know, if you're working on a game like SpongeBob Bikini Bottom or something, you know, you had to make the models as light as possible, and you couldn't always put a beveled edge on something, but the bevel is what catches the light. So if you're making realistic things, don't skimp on those bevels, because that's what's going to catch the light. So that's a little tip. Just, you know, keep your polys where you need them. Don't, if if you're making you know, a table, there's no reason to have all your polys in the middle of the table. You know, put them on the edges.
Put them on the edges. Cool.
Yeah.
Now let me ask you, pertaining to that, in a game, the player has often the ability to move the camera around. How that's going to maybe mess up the lighting that you've created in the environment. How do you compensate for that?
So there's, I mean, it sort of depends on the game that you're working on and what you're trying to do. Some games are lit from the camera's perspective, right? So you're a character walking through a cave and, you know, you have a light in your hand that lights the scene. And, you know, the environment might be ambient lit. It might have occlusion, you know, just showing the shape of things. But the main key light is like the torch that they're holding or something that's actually on the character. So so that might be a way to manipulate where the light goes.
Okay.
And then,
but what if that isn't an option?
Okay, well, you can use lighting to focus the player on where you want them to look. You know, if they're in an open world, right? Like, you know, we've been playing Red Dead 2, and you can just walk all around that world. You know, like you have no idea where you're going sometimes. You're like, wait, where on the map am I? You know, and you know, but if you notice, like sometimes, you know, the cabin will be lit up, or, you know, like some area will have extra lighting on it to sort of point you to those areas. And in game design, you know, you often have a big marker in your open world called a weenie. I'm sure you guys talk about this.
We talk about weenies.
Yeah. And so you look for the weenie, and it probably has some lighting that also draws you to that weenie. Maybe it has those God rays coming down. You know, you see that in more simple games all the time. Sure. You know, what jewel are you supposed to click on? There's a God ray over it. You know what jewel to click on, you know. And so lighting can be really important for the practical gameplay in that case, you know.
So in something that a lot of games have been addressing lately, within the last maybe 5-6 years or so, is the idea of accessibility, is the fact that maybe a player might not be able to see color. And so what kind of techniques have you been applying to your projects to kind of help players that might not see, you know, the color spectrum in the same way?
Yeah, that's actually super important. One thing that I do a lot of times is I will, if I'm lighting a scene, let's say, I might take a snapshot of it and then take all the chroma out of it, like basically desaturate it, and see where those colors are blending too much, and separate those colors more based on that. And it just helps. It's a tool to help me see when somebody might not be able to see the difference between a red and a green, you know, or a blue and a brown. My father was colorblind, so it's actually something that I'm somewhat sensitive to, and it's part of the reason why I personally am so interested in color myself. Is, you know, I always used to have to separate his socks, you know, and so so I'm always very sensitive to like close colors, and you know, how I might want to use that or I might not, you know, if I'm, especially if I'm designing something I want to be used by everybody.
Right. Well, cool. Well, that's great. All right. So I want to ask you about a different game that you worked on. This was when you were working for Cold Dish on a game called Rubber Bandito, which was a little mobile game. And I was curious, you know, you had worked on theatrical, so you have a nice big screen to work with, and you have a console, which you have, you know, generally a good sized TV set. But now you're dealing with a little tiny phone. And so how, as an artist, I mean, I'm sure it could be very frustrating to try to create as best looking art as you can, but for such a small way to view it. What advice do you have for somebody who is creating content for that tiny screen, but you still want it to look great.
Well, one thing that I really actually was a benefit of working on a small screen was I tended to paint big and then shrink it down.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times it would actually make my art better because it looked so much smoother you know, and more contrasty when it was small. I think contrasts are something that you need to pay attention to when you're working at that size. And also paying attention to the color space, although current phones and everything, I mean, have really broad color space. But I would say, you know, making sure that things don't look too repetitive is one thing, you know, because we had in that game, there was like sort of modular stuff going on a lot of the time. So
right.
Trying to have enough modules so it didn't look too repetitive.
Well, that's always been a classic challenge in video game art, right? Like if you look at old Mario and Sonic games, they only had so many tiles to work with. So
of course,
you can always chalk it up to stylization if you want, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So I was gonna move. There's a few other. Was there anything? You know, I see you've worked at the House of Moves, and you were a freelance artist for a while. Anything exciting from that, or shall we jump to virtual reality stuff?
I think it's fine to jump to virtual reality
All
because
right,
that's where
all
I
right.
live now. That's where I'm happy now. So.
Awesome. So I mean, you are you have worked in virtual reality since 2015 or so, or even before that.
I'm trying to remember. That sounds about right. Might have been 16. I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
somewhere in there.
So you worked for Spaces was the
Yep.
first company that that was that your first VR company that you had worked for?
No,
Oh, who did you work with before?
I worked with another one before that, which will not be named.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, it was a weird experience. But I will say this: it was the only time I ever worked for a company that didn't pay me what it was supposed to pay me.
Oh dear.
So it was an odd experience. But I will say this for that company, I got some experience in Unity. And before that, I hadn't used Unity. So it was great because I was able to, you know, learn some things that helped me out.
Yeah. I have a thing I tell our graduating students, which is you should never just take a job for money, although it is good to be paid what you're worth. But there should always be at least one other thing that you get out of the job than just the paycheck.
Of
And
course.
so it sounds like at least you got Unity experience, which is, you know, for some people would probably maybe not as easy to get back in 2015.
Yeah,
So.
and basically it's funny because that experience, it was kind of negative because it wasn't that they didn't pay me what I was worth, they didn't pay anybody on the staff. That was the problem.
Oh, that's not good.
And so it actually really soured me a little bit on the industry. And I said, you know what, I have my own business cutting silhouettes, you know, I was doing that a lot, and said, you know, why am I even bothering? It was at the point in my career where I was like, well, maybe this is where it stops, you know.
Right.
But then Shiraz dragged me back in.
Yes, our friend
So,
Shiraz.
I worked with Shiraz at THQ, and then later on a few small projects here and there. We kind of kept in touch and did some stuff, and he was like, hey, I need some files converted from Maxx to Maya. And I was like, hey, I do Maxx to Maya, and then he's like, you want to come in for like a week? And I was like, sure. And then it was like 2 years later. You know? And my whole life had changed by then. And and it was fabulous. It was really wonderful. You know, Spaces was a wild and crazy ride, and I loved it. And you know, I'm grateful for that. So
yes, yeah, it's one of my it's been one of my favorite places to work as well.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a few of the projects that you were working on before I got there, including the you did the My Hello Kitty, right?
Yeah,
So tell us what the Hello Kitty project was.
okay, so so I'll take a step back actually before
Oh,
Hello
okay, all right.
Kitty. So we started, the first project I actually worked on in Spaces was working on the Actiongram project with My Singing Monsters.
Oh, My Singing Monster, that's right. I thought that was after Hello Kitty, but
No, what happened was we were doing just one character from My Singing Monsters.
okay.
And it was pretty successful, so they asked us to do a few more.
Right. So
And
when you say you did a character, what do you mean you did a character?
So there's a popular video game called My Singing Monsters, and it's
Right.
like a phone game, and it's
Right.
great, a lot of fun. I love that game. And there's this character in it called Mammoth, and they wanted to take Mammoth and put him in this headset. It was a HoloLens, and they wanted to have it be so that it was like an early form of XR, or really an advanced form of AR, where you could see the character in your world, and it's an animated character flipping around and doing its thing. But it's in the real world in your eyes. You know, you could
Right.
see it that way. So this was before like Magic Leap was out and things. It was the first HoloLens.
Right.
And Actiongram was sort of designed to just have these characters be able to be brought into your world, and you can make movie clips with them and send them out. So that was the whole project with Actiongram. And so we were tasked with trying to help build these characters and help push the pipeline and create like a way of doing things that would work in the HoloLens, which was somewhat limited in what it could do, especially at the time. And so we did those characters, and they were pretty successful. We did the extra My Singing Monsters characters. They were successful. So they asked us to do the Sanrio characters, which was the Hello Kitty project. And so we did Hello Kitty and 3 of her friends. And because I had been working on these other ones, I actually it was a bigger project at that point. So I became the project manager on that. Right. And I also was a tech artist on that. I was tasked with not only, I became the project manager, I think only because Sandy got pregnant. So we had been working together, and so then I got to do it. And it was great, actually. I had a great team. A lot of some of my old friends from THQ came over, and they were animating, and they were building models and rigging, and so I was then taking all of their art and integrating it and sending it off to Microsoft. Right. And so so that was the kind of the first project that I got to project manage in that way. I had done some tech art way in the old days on some Winnie the Pooh games back in the old days. So I had a little bit of experience with that kind of thing. But yeah, it was very successful. And, Sanrio is a hard client to please. Yeah. Everything has to be just perfect on model, like to no end. And they had actually never done some of those characters in 3D before. So they didn't even really know what on model was in 3D.
So you're dealing with these characters, they're interacting with what the player sees in the real world. How are you dealing with things like lighting, which could be radically different depending on where the user is?
Correct. So the HoloLens does have some things in it that have some acknowledgement of the world around you. But we had to create like a rig for those characters, and we had to sometimes self-illuminate certain things so that they always appeared.
So, I mean, was you were getting information from the HoloLens, and if it said, look, this is too dark or too light, then you have like a pre-set up lighting rig that lights them up, or?
No, I think
just...
the HoloLens has an awareness of the space that you're in, and it somehow affects the lighting.
Okay.
But what we really had to be careful of, this sounds weird, but we just had to be careful of not having our materials go too black, because in the HoloLens, black is transparent.
Oh.
And so, you know, you might have a character that has, you know, black skin, like we had a penguin character that had black skin, but you can't have it go all the way to black because it would be completely transparent. So we had to look at the colors and sort of interpret them so that they would work in the HoloLens. So that was our biggest challenge, I think, in the HoloLens.
Knowing what the limitations of the hardware are, that's going to dictate what kind of creative output you can make.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Oh. What about Reggie Watts?
Oh, so that was just because we had done all these other projects with ActionGram. They asked us to help out on the Reggie Watts project. And he had his own ActionGram pack. And we just developed a couple of little props in his pack, some cute little island world things. And again, you know, I was really project managing and doing some of the integration mostly for that. But it was, you know, again, just because we had done the other ones, they said, oh, could you help us with this? You know, and we had done one for the Huntsman, a movie. It was just like a one-off, and it wasn't for ActionGram, it was just for the HoloLens. So yeah.
So that was kind of like building these assets to then be incorporated with an existing product, or?
Yes, exactly. So ActionGram was an existing product, but we would have to create these assets in like a very specific way, and to be able to send it off to Microsoft so that they could actually use it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. So then you started doing VR, the VR stuff with Spaces. Now, I don't know how much we can talk about the projects that never got released, or did they ever get released? I don't even know. Whatever happened with Dreamland? Did that ever get released?
I believe it did in China.
Oh, it did get released. Oh, okay, cool. So when I got there, you guys were in the process of developing essentially what is called a location-based experience, which is a guest will wear a VR headset. We were using Vives, and we had a backpack, and then you had, in some cases, a gun, but in other cases you didn't. We kind of went back and forth with things you could have had or not had. But like, how did you, like, what was your introduction to VR, and like, how big of a learning curve was there for you to kind of wrap your head around it?
So we had done some other projects before that that were in VR. We had done some work with Children's Hospital and Disney. We had done some work with National Geographic. And so we had been exploring a lot of different areas of VR. We also had a study we helped with, an implicit bias study we helped with. And so we had been working in VR, you know, throughout that time, not just on the HoloLens. Right. And so when we had our big pivot towards Terminator, we had just been starting to work on a location-based sort of sandbox where we were exploring different things that we could do. And then the guys secured the rights to Terminator, and that was our guiding star from then on in. And we worked our butts off, as you may recall, putting something together that was visceral and exciting and different. And there were some demos that we were doing at the time that never got into things that I still think are better than half the things I've seen since.
the minecart is still the best VR thing I've ever done.
That was
amazing. Yeah.
And so, so I think, you know, that all was playing into it. You know, we were very lucky to have the talent that we had on that team.
Oh, yeah, amazing talent.
Yeah, you know, it was kind of a mature team as far as, you know, people have been working in VFX, in games, in film, and people had their knowledge to share, and it was crazy at times, and you know, very seat of our pants.
Yes.
A lot of times.
Spaces yo.
Yeah, spaces yo. But it was, to me, one of the things that I loved about it was that they weren't afraid to take chances, and they weren't afraid to really go for the adventure, and I loved that. I loved that part of it, and I was down for that ride. Like it was great, and you know, all that stuff still informs me, and I am so grateful to have gotten to sit next to Brad Herman for all those months and just absorb, you know, anything he said.
It was like sitting next to an isotope. It was just radiation coming off of that guy.
Seriously,
you couldn't help but learn things just from being near him. So what about for aspiring VR game developers? What if somebody is, you know, I mean, we were new to VR, but we weren't new to making games or entertainment or, you know, all the things. But what about somebody who is like in love with the medium and is like wants to create something for it? How would you get them up to speed, or what would you tell them to, you know, these are the things you need to know when you're interested in virtual reality?
Okay, well, I would say, first of all, and I still hold this to be true, I worked with a team for a little while consulting, and they just wouldn't believe me, but stop moving the damn camera all the time. You're gonna get people so sick.
Oh, yeah.
You can move the camera forward. Don't turn it.
Yeah,
just try to avoid it, unless you're trying to give them a moment of that. But that's the first thing I'll say. Don't make VR that makes people sick, because then nobody wants to try your VR.
Well, I think I think that was where I add a value add to our work. Was I was the guy who got the most sick from VR, so I would always say, put me in first, and if it makes me sick, then we need to change it.
Yeah. Well, and to that note, one thing that'll make you sick in VR is having bad frame rates.
Yeah.
So if you can keep it over 90 frames a second, that's ideal. So that means sometimes, you know, as an artist, this breaks my heart that sometimes you have to sacrifice some art, you know, to make it playable. And I think it's something to keep in mind, you know, when you're designing a game and when you're making art for a game, when you're making sound for a game, all of those things take up space in the game. Even bad code can take up space in the game. So, so if it's not serving those 90 frames a second, then sacrifice, you know, get it out of there. And, you know, I actually learned even more about optimization after I left Spaces. And there are things that I wish I had known a little bit more about when I was there. You know, in Unity anyway, you know, your draw calls are so important. And I've discovered ways of getting my draw calls down without necessarily sacrificing the art all the time. So, and the technology is getting better and better, obviously, you know, with those Unreal sizzle reels, you can see.
Yeah, leaps and bounds.
Yeah, you can pour geometry into your game. But at some point, it's going to get limited. There is a limit.
There's always a limit.
Right. And so I would say being mindful of that. That was one thing I feel like Spaces actually had a little edge over some of the other VR companies, was because we all came from games. Yeah. So we understood that you couldn't make things with every polygon and every texture and every material in the world because it wouldn't run. And I think by doing that, we were able to make things that ran, at speed, and that was important. So I would say
playable
that,
and fast.
yeah.
Yeah. So as an environmental creator with the VR LBE, you're now making virtual environments that the guests can actually interact with. All right. Like we were doing one-to-one mapping of our stage and of items on our stage, and the guests could physically pick up a power cell and plug that into a computer console, and then things would activate as you went. Like, what were the challenges now? What was the realizations that you made as you're building these digital sets that are physical?
Yeah.
Right? Like it's kind of mind-blowing, right? Where you're like where does reality end and where does the digital begin? And
Well,
vice versa.
I think we all learned a lot of things about, safety, making
Yeah.
making
Yes.
things that aren't too heavy or aren't too sharp or aren't
Right.
aren't going to trip you when you're in VR. One thing that we were always really conscious of was a registration. How do you make the real world item register with the thing you're seeing in the headset? And it's really important. If you're off by a couple of inches, that can be a real problem.
Yeah, you grab for something and it's not there, but it is, but it isn't. What about were there any tricks that you guys developed when you were thinking about those things that the people were interacting with that you did purely digitally versus the physical element of it?
Well, I would say there were definitely some effects that happened that were purely digital that could not happen in real life. But what I really loved was we were cognizant of what those effects might feel like anyway. So like you might see a laser beam but feel heat, or you might walk over to a bank of air conditioners on the top of the roof and you would feel a fan, and so I think being cognizant of what it's just going to add to the believability of what's there. And to me, it was the most fun thing in the world to just have this pretend world that really felt real, like all of a sudden you're on the holodeck, and it's and it's only going to get better. I mean, I have seen things in VR and felt things in haptic suits that you just, it blows your mind, and that's coming. You'll reach out and you'll feel something pushing back at you and you won't know how it's happening, because the technology.
Do you feel that that's the future of the industry? I mean, like, where do you see, I mean, granted, the industry, at least in VR, has been a little kicked in the shins by quarantine and all that, right? All those poor, spaces and void and all them have unfortunately suffered the consequences. But where do you see, like, I guess it's kind of a two-part question. One is where did you see it going? And now that we're in this new reality, where do you still see it going?
So where I think that I honestly think the industry still isn't ready for full immersive quite yet.
Right.
I think that the hygiene issues with COVID are just extreme. I mean, insane.
Huge. They were huge even before COVID.
Yeah, we were super concerned about it, and like we did all these procedures and practices, and now it's even 10 times more. It's uncomfortable to even offer a headset to somebody to look at something right now. However, people have been getting their personal headsets at home and getting more and more into that, and I think that area will definitely keep growing. I mean, I think in the time of COVID, it just, like, to me, it makes total sense when you can't go anywhere, put a headset on, and all of a sudden you're in a room with 20 other people in avatar form, but at least they're people, and I think it has a lot of practical applications for that. I'm not sure that the marketing has caught up with that yet.
Right. It still feels very niche.
Yeah, But I think even before then, I think AR is really coming into its own, because if you can't go to a store to look at a piece of furniture, bringing one into your house via AR on your phone is a really viable option,
Right.
you know, to look around and see it. You know, we worked on a project at MAP called youdancewedance.org. This is where you can go see it. It was
Okay.
a way to encourage people to move their bodies with the dance group Pilabolus. And so in this little web app, which you could go to right now and play with on your phone, it'll have a little suggestion of something you can do to dance, you know, like, oh, pretend your feet are sock monkeys. I don't know. They'll have some suggestion, and then you can do that. And then you'll be rewarded by getting a dancer from Pilabolus dancing across your room in AR. And so I think these forms of theater and shopping and even ways of interacting with the world where you don't have to actually physically touch anything are becoming more and more important with what's happened with the pandemic. And so I think right now AR is definitely an important part of our industry.
Right. So the other big project you had mentioned earlier, Embody, also deals with what I would call the intersection of wellness and entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It has kind of this dual function. It's you know, meant to be entertaining, but it's also got this lifestyle aspect to it. Do you see that becoming a more predominant type of entertainment in the future? Or
I actually do. I don't know if it's really considered entertainment, but it's a way for you to maybe experience something that helps your body be more balanced or centered. I'm actually working on a project right now, which I can talk about because we've launched our website and some of the media and stuff around it, but it's called Breakthrough.
Mhm.
And it's like a 2-minute micro break where, you know, you're on a desktop and you can experience some of that, you know, maybe centeredness that you saw in a thing like Embody, or maybe can energize you or help you be a little more joyful. And it's a way for people to take a break during the workday, and it not being about, you know, going to get a candy bar or a Diet Coke or or, you know, whatever, you know, you're
wait, there's other things that you can do than just
yeah, exactly. And so it's a very, to me, it's a very interesting little project, which, you know, could grow into something that maybe, especially as we're working from home, you know.
Yeah, people are getting antsy, right? They're
Yeah,
not used to, and unless, excuse me, unless you're like a gamer like myself, you're not used to planting yourself in one place for several hours at a time.
well, it's also not
Uh,
that healthy, right? Like
no,
always
yeah,
being
it's not good.
still
It's not
and
good.
sitting.
Right,
So having 2 minutes where you stand up and move in certain ways, um, move your body around
right.
and breathe differently, can actually uh, give you actual physical results that are positive.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you know, with schools being online, right, all the time, and
Yeah.
people being,
We're always seeing pictures of miserable looking little kids, you know, sitting in front of Zoom, right? So maybe maybe the instructors should build in a little bit of a breakthrough for these kids to, you know, take a couple of minutes and wave their arms and run around and breathe differently.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
Oh, that sounds great. That sounds like helpful. Everybody could use something like that, I think, right now. That's a great project. It sounds like to be involved with.
yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about your other great love, which is something that I know you've done for a long time, and that is cutting silhouettes,
Yes.
which you've done professionally for many, many years, and you've you've told me that you get invited, or used to get hired to go to events and parties and things like that to cut. This is a very interesting art form, one that you know, other than if you go to like Knott's Berry Farm or Disneyland. I don't know if I can't remember the last time I saw somebody doing that, but how are the things that you've learned as an artist from doing silhouettes helped you in digital?
So it's funny because one of the things I get out of sitting down and cutting out pictures of 100 people in a night is I'm keeping my visual skills up. It's a lot like drawing. I call it drawing with scissors. And it's a way for me to keep that sense of my eyes and my hands doing the same thing. Does that make sense? So I love it. It also is as an artist, it's a nice break from sometimes doing effects or computer stuff, which, you know, often you can work for a long time on something. Maybe you work 4 months on an environment, and like your art director's like, okay, at the end of it. Whereas, I go to an event and I cut a silhouette in 3 minutes and people are standing behind me like hype men at a rap show, like, oh yeah, and it's incredible. So I get a lot out of that. I love it. And it's an old art form that is somewhat dying. There's not a lot of silhouette artists in the country anymore, which is one of the reasons I keep the skill up.
Right. How many silhouette artists would you say are left in the US?
I don't know for sure, but we are in probably the closest thing to the hub of silhouette artists in the country, simply because Disneyland will always have silhouette artists, and Knott's actually has silhouette artists still. Leslie, I think, cuts there. but put it this way, I can name most of them who are working professionally, and I'm friends with a lot of the artists in the area, because if we have an event where you need like 6 silhouette artists, you got to know the 6 that are there. So
so maybe there's there's room for maybe it's a growth industry.
Right. If games don't work out for you guys, silhouettes are always.
Have you? I mean, for every time I've seen, the silhouette art, which is really amazing that you're able to capture a likeness of somebody with just, very few cuts, I guess, is that the right word?
Yeah.
Have you ever thought? First of all, it always reminds me of Balinese shadow puppetry, right?
Oh,
have you ever seen that? Right, like that. Have you ever thought of making some sort of game or VR project or something that merges the idea of the cut silhouette and some sort of gameplay or something like that?
I have. Shiraz for a long time was trying to come up with something I could use my silhouettes in, because he was also like really interested in that idea. There was a Disney VR experience that had a little bit of silhouetting in it, and I was like, how did I not know about this? But apparently it didn't use silhouetting throughout the whole thing. And there's the old Lottie Roniger films. I don't know if you've ever seen them. The Tale of Prince Achmed. They're some of the earliest animated films in existence.
That are silhouette.
They're like puppet films. Yeah.
Oh, nice. And then one of our guests mentioned something called Pretty Deadly that has a silhouette artist in it. Ooh. I don't know if it's a game or a cartoon or something, but
I would like to check that out.
We'll have to look at. Oh, it's a comic book. Oh, all right. Well, that falls in line with your other interests, which are comic books.
I do love comic books.
Yeah. You even do a podcast about the X-Men.
We do. My husband and I do a podcast called X Aspirations. I highly recommend listening to us blather on about the X-Men. It's an issue by issue history of the X-Men.
Awesome. Do you have a link for that? Maybe you can share in the chat, or?
Sure. It's x-aspirations.com. Let's see. Where can I put it? In the chat?
In the chat. Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
All right. So let me try to get to a few more of the questions here. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. Thank you so far for everybody that put in here. All right, so Perry asks, do you have any thoughts on indie games involving classic animation techniques and styles, like, for example, Cuphead and games like that?
Yes, I love when there's other styles that are used. I forget what it was called. There was this game where they had knitting.
Oh,
like
yeah. That's Kirby's Epic Yarn, right? Has the knitting in it?
Yes, it is so cool. And then there's like
Little Big Planet has kind of a craft work cardboard vibe to it, and there was a Yoshi's Island, I think, that also had kind of a craft feel.
What
to
was
it.
Mike Dietz's game?
Oh, the Neverhood, right?
Yeah,
with the sculpted claymation.
Gorgeous stuff. Yes, please use unusual, weird stuff. And I mean, you could do it in 3D and just, you know, make it look like it's the weird stuff.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, I'm all for that. I think anything that that looks different. I mean, I guess that's, you know, realism is wonderful and beautiful. But it's so interesting when you can get out of that and stylize it in some way.
My personal feeling is I feel like the video game industry has been held hostage by realism. I would love to see so much more stylization. You think of all the styles of comic book artists and painters and animators and that are out there, and you know, where are my games that are in those different art styles, right? Yeah. I don't want to just see the real world. I can see the real world. I want the world I can only imagine.
Yes, I absolutely agree 100%. So get creative out there, guys. Don't be held down.
So speaking of that, Cameron has a question, which is there somebody that you've always wanted to work with, or some property that you've wanted to work on that you've always loved?
Wow. Okay, there's a lot. There's a lot out there.
Keep it down to the top 5 or 3.
Okay. Well, first of all, I have to say, this is going to sound weird. I'm a huge comedy fan.
Okay.
Like, so anything with comedy, I would love to see. I love comedy based games, if that makes any sense, like the old Jack games or Jackbox games nowadays. Those are funny games, and I think funny is something I would like to see more in games, and I would love to work more on. I know that sounds not like that.
All right. No, get yours, be funnier.
Yeah, I would like funny, and by people who are actually funny. That's one thing about game design. I want to tell you, game designers, just because you can design a game doesn't mean you're funny. So get somebody who's funny to write it. Right. You know what I mean? Yep. And I think also just to circle back on something for games, which we haven't mentioned at all, but is very important, is sound. I think one of the things that new game designers sometimes forget is how important the sound is. And so I would say, you know, think about your game as much in terms of sound as you do in terms of visuals, and your game is going to be a million times better. So just a random thing that I have learned. Somebody had asked, like, what's something that I've learned in my career? I would say, even though I'm not a sound person per se, you know, I've had to integrate some sound here and there, but it's just really important. Don't neglect it, you know?
Okay. Yeah, no, sound is amazingly important. I would love to see more games that lean heavier on sound. There's a few like Papa Sangre and I don't know. There's certain games that just really you know, they won't have characters that talk, and so therefore they'll rely, like Limbo, for example, is one that has really great sound design.
You asked me what one of my favorite games was. That has really fun sound is Katamari Damacy.
Oh yeah.
I loved that game. That was a different mechanic than almost any mechanic. That was like a cool art style, was stylized, and the sound was so funny, and the writing was funny. You know, the king was always so disappointed in his prince. You know, and that's I would like to see more of that in games.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I agree. All right, here's something else that I would love to see more of in games, and that is, what can the gaming industry do to be more welcoming to female creators?
Ah, that's a good one. Because I've been female the whole time that I have been. So I would say, I would just say that just because somebody's a woman doesn't mean their ideas or experience is lesser. They may not speak in the way that you're expecting. They may look at teamwork differently than what maybe some of the guys are expecting. Not all, but some. And so try to keep an open mind about that kind of thing. Don't just look at the women as objects, either for good or bad. And I would say for the women, don't sell yourself short. There's a lot of, there's a lot of imposter, feelings and stuff
Yeah.
that
That's tough.
women go through. And I mean, everybody goes through that.
I was gonna say that's not just women, Candace.
Yeah.
Guys get imposter syndrome all the time too.
I know,
but yes,
but the difference
it's good advice.
The difference is you could be a woman, like literally with, an Emmy award for directing something, and there will be some dude out there who questions how much you know about that subject. It's like
Right.
So
right, and then I guess the advice to the dudes is don't be that dude.
Yeah, don't be that dude.
Don't be that dude. Right.
And I mean, yeah, and I just think just keep at it, be tenacious.
Yeah, don't give up. There's room for everybody in the gaming industry.
Yeah, I've worked with a lot of very mediocre people. Nobody we know, of course, but there's room for all levels, and there's room for growth at every level. You can be you could be like the top coder on the planet and still not know a lot about the color of your game or the sound, or there's always more to learn.
Right.
So,
or even how to interact with other people.
Sure.
Right?
Sure, that can happen too.
That's usually what I find with programmers. All right. So out of all the programs, I know he's picking on the programmers. Out of all the programs, out of all the projects that you've worked on, which is the one you want to be remembered for, and why?
Oh, this is a good question. There's a lot I don't want to be remembered for. But I'm very proud of the Terminator experience, although, there's other Terminator experiences that can muddy that water. But I am proud of what we were able to do. I'm very proud of the work that I've been working on lately with MAP, and, some of the stuff that goes a little bit beyond games in a way. They're still experiences, and they're still designed, and there's still gameplay involved, and there's still
absolutely
all those things, but they have a maybe a higher purpose in some areas. That has been really attractive to me, and I'm really grateful to be working in that space right now.
That's great. Yeah. So what is next for Candice Colbert?
Well, I'll be at MAP for a while, I think. I've been very, very happy with what I've been doing there, and hopefully Breakthrough will break through. We'll see. You never know. But I want to continue working on those kind of things. I'm still going to cut silhouettes on the side. I just am. Nice. And I'm still going to make a podcast, and I still am going to do a million things because that's what I do. But
yeah, we got to create. Creators got to create.
Exactly. And art is, you can make art with anything. It's not about the tool, it's about the art. So just keep that in mind, people. If you don't know a certain program, don't worry, you'll learn it if you need it for a job. If you don't know, if you don't know Maya, but Blender, well, great. You'll learn Maya if you need to. And, just don't stop yourself because of that, because it's the art, it's the principles, it's the background. That's the stuff that's going to serve you. Technology will always change.
Yeah. The only consistent thing is change.
Exactly.
So if we want to find Candice Colbert and your art and your silhouettes and your website and all that, you've already put up your X-Men podcast link. Thank you. Where can we? Yeah, X-Aspirations. Where can we find you online?
Sure. I am on Twitter as Artist Candice. You can tweet at me there. I am on Instagram, although that's mostly just silhouettes, as Sil by Candice, SILBYCANDICE. And I do have a website, although I have not updated it very recently, called digitalartcandy.com. So, you can contact me there, and hopefully you learn something from
Well, get inspired, right? Get inspired by what you're creating, and the fact that you have been in the industry for so long and so successful. This has been so lovely, Candice. It is so great to talk to you, and thank you so very much for sharing all your knowledge and all your passion, and it's been wonderful talking with you, and thank you for coming and speaking with us.
Oh, you're welcome. It is my pleasure. Absolutely. It's great to talk to you too, Scott.
And thank you to everybody who joined us. It was lovely to have you. Thanks again. Remember, we have some other great events coming up. Keep your eye on the meetup, the New York Film Academy Game Mentor meetup page. We have the level design workshop coming up. We have the advanced computer animation with Craig Caton Largent coming up in September. We'll have other Masters of Game Designs with fantastic guests like Candice. You can watch all of these eventually. Some of these will still need to get uploaded onto YouTube. But thank you very much for joining us. I hope all of you stay safe, stay well, and we will see you all very soon.
All right.